Imagine a criminal mastermind who does not simply want to steal money. Instead, he wants to challenge the very system that creates, controls, and gives value to that money. He gathers a group of strangers, gives each of them the name of a city, creates an almost impossible plan, and prepares them for a robbery that could change their lives forever. That is the basic idea behind Money Heist, internationally known by its original Spanish title, La Casa de Papel, meaning the House of Paper. Created by Alex Pina, the Spanish crime drama became one of the most recognizable international television sensations of its generation. Although it is often casually described as a 2017 movie, Money Heist is actually a television series that originally premiered in Spain in 2017. Its story revolves around two enormous heists planned by a mysterious criminal mastermind known as the Professor. What begins as a carefully calculated criminal operation gradually becomes something much bigger, a story about loyalty, sacrifice, rebellion, love, fear, identity, and the complicated relationship between ordinary people and powerful institutions. What makes Money Heist especially fascinating is that the criminals are not presented simply as villains. The series deliberately creates situations in which viewers can understand their motivations, sympathize with their personal struggles, and even question whether the people opposing them are always morally superior. The result is a tense crime drama that combines action, suspense, emotional storytelling, romance, political symbolism, and psychological conflict. The Professor, the mind behind the impossible plan. At the center of the entire story is the Professor. Unlike the stereotypical criminal mastermind, the Professor does not rely on physical strength. His greatest weapon is preparation. He studies possibilities, predicts reactions, analyzes weaknesses, and creates backup plans for situations that most people would never even consider. His approach is based on one simple principle: the more carefully you prepare, the fewer surprises you will face. The Professor recruits people with different personalities, backgrounds, talents, and emotional weaknesses. Instead of using their real names, he assigns them city names such as Tokyo, Berlin, Nairobi, Rio, Denver, Moscow, Helsinki, and Oslo. This decision serves several purposes. It protects their identities, creates emotional distance, and gives the group a strange sense of belonging. They are no longer simply individuals with complicated pasts. They become members of a team. But the Professor understands something extremely important: a perfect plan can still fail because of human emotions. That becomes one of the central ideas of Money Heist. The criminals have plans for police tactics, security systems, negotiations, escape routes, and unexpected obstacles. But they cannot completely control jealousy, fear, anger, love, betrayal, or grief. And that is where the real drama begins. Tokyo, the unpredictable narrator. Tokyo is one of the most important figures in the series, not only because she participates directly in the heists but also because her perspective helps shape the audience's understanding of events. She is impulsive, emotional, fearless, and unpredictable. Where the Professor represents calculation, Tokyo frequently represents instinct. Her personality creates both opportunities and problems. She can be courageous when everyone else is frightened, but she can also make decisions that put the entire operation at risk. This contradiction makes her compelling. She is not designed to be a flawless action hero. She is a deeply imperfect person trying to survive extraordinary circumstances. The series also uses Tokyo as an unreliable narrator. Because much of the story is filtered through her perspective, viewers are sometimes encouraged to experience events emotionally rather than objectively. This storytelling technique gives Money Heist an unusual structure. Instead of simply asking, "What happened?" the audience is often encouraged to ask, "How does this character understand what happened?" That distinction becomes increasingly important as the story moves between different moments in time. The first heist, the Royal Mint. The first major operation focuses on the Royal Mint of Spain. The objective sounds simple: enter the building, take control, print money, and escape. But the Professor does not want the group to simply steal existing cash. Instead, the plan involves producing new banknotes. This is a crucial difference because the operation is designed around time. The longer the group remains inside, the more money they can potentially produce. However, staying inside also creates enormous danger. The building contains employees and visitors who become hostages. Outside, the police begin building a strategy to regain control. Inside, the criminals must maintain order among the hostages while simultaneously dealing with their own conflicts. The Professor remains outside, coordinating the operation from a distance. His role is fascinating because he becomes a criminal commander who refuses to behave like a traditional criminal. He wants to avoid unnecessary casualties and repeatedly emphasizes the importance of following the plan. But the longer the siege continues, the harder that becomes. Every hostage has a different personality. Some cooperate. Others resist. Some attempt to manipulate the criminals. Others search for opportunities to escape. Meanwhile, the police investigation becomes increasingly sophisticated. The first heist therefore becomes a battle between two forms of intelligence. On one side is the professor and his carefully prepared strategy. On the other side are investigators attempting to understand the criminals, identify their weaknesses, and discover the person coordinating everything, why the hostages matter. One of the smartest storytelling elements in Money Heist is the use of hostages. They are not treated merely as background characters. Some hostages become central to the story, while others represent different reactions to fear and authority. A hostage may cooperate because survival is the priority. Another may resist because they refuse to accept humiliation. Someone else may attempt to manipulate the criminals because they believe the situation gives them an opportunity. This creates a miniature society inside the building. The criminals are not completely united, and the hostages are not completely united either. That complexity prevents the story from becoming a simple, criminals versus police narrative. Instead, the series constantly changes the balance of power. Someone who appears powerless can suddenly become important. Someone who appears loyal can become dangerous. Someone who appears strong can collapse under pressure. This uncertainty is one of the main reasons the series remains suspenseful. Berlin, discipline, authority, and contradiction. Berlin is one of the most memorable characters in Money Heist. He is intelligent, confident, sophisticated, and extremely commanding. At the same time, his behavior can be cruel, arrogant, and difficult to accept. This contradiction is deliberate. Berlin represents one of the most complicated questions in the series. Can a person be charismatic and fascinating while also behaving in deeply troubling ways? The answer is yes, and that is precisely why the character generates such strong reactions. Berlin is not simply included to make the team more dangerous. He represents authority within the group. The professor creates the strategy, but Berlin often becomes the person responsible for enforcing discipline inside the building. This creates tension because Berlin's personality does not always match the professor's more controlled approach. Their relationship also reveals that the heist is not just a business operation. There are personal connections and hidden histories influencing decisions. As the story reveals more about the characters, viewers realize that the professor's plan is connected to a much larger emotional world. Nairobi, the emotional heart of the team. Nairobi brings a different energy to the group. She is confident, passionate, intelligent, and deeply committed to the success of the operation. One of her most important responsibilities involves overseeing the production of money during the first heist. But her importance goes beyond her technical role. Nairobi often becomes a source of motivation for the others. She believes in the group and repeatedly encourages people to keep moving forward when the situation becomes overwhelming. Her character also demonstrates how the series mixes crime storytelling with emotional relationships. The members of the gang are not machines executing a plan. They have hopes, fears, memories, relationships, and dreams. That humanity is one of the reasons audiences become emotionally invested in their survival. Rio and Tokyo, love inside a war zone. The relationship between Rio and Tokyo adds another layer to the story. Their connection develops in the middle of an operation where emotional decisions can have enormous consequences. Love can be comforting, but it can also become a weakness. The professor understands this. He knows that emotional attachment can make members of the team act irrationally. But he cannot completely eliminate emotion from the operation. This is another major theme of Money Heist. Human beings cannot be reduced to calculations. Even the most intelligent plan must eventually confront human feelings. The police investigation. Outside the Royal Mint, the police face an enormous challenge. They are not simply trying to stop a robbery. They must understand a criminal organization whose leader has spent years preparing for the possibility of police intervention. The professor's greatest advantage is psychological. He studies the behavior of the authorities and attempts to predict their decisions. But the police are also learning. This creates a fascinating intellectual battle. The audience watches both sides make calculations. The criminals ask, "What will the police do next?" The police ask, "What would the criminals do if they were in our position?" This constant prediction game creates suspense without requiring action in every scene. A conversation can be as dangerous as a gunfight. A telephone call can change everything. A single piece of information can destroy months of planning. The professor and Raquel. One of the most interesting relationships in the series develops between the professor and Raquel Murillo, the police inspector assigned to the case. The irony is powerful. The woman investigating the heist begins developing a relationship with the very person responsible for it. But she does not initially understand his true identity. This creates dramatic tension because the audience knows something she does not. Every conversation becomes a psychological game. The professor must maintain his false identity while learning information about the investigation. Raquel must investigate a criminal mastermind while unknowingly becoming emotionally connected to him. Their relationship demonstrates one of the series' favorite storytelling techniques, dramatic irony. The audience knows more than one or more characters, which creates tension even during apparently ordinary conversations. Flashbacks and non-linear storytelling. Another major feature of Money Heist is its narrative structure. The story does not always move in a simple straight line. Flashbacks reveal information about the past. Time jumps provide new perspectives. Hidden motivations are gradually exposed. This allows the writers to keep important information secret until the right moment. A character may appear mysterious during one episode, and later a flashback can completely change the audience's understanding of that person. This technique also makes the story feel larger than the immediate robbery. The heist is not simply something that happens in the present. It is connected to years of preparation, family relationships, previous experiences, and personal trauma. The past continually influences the present, the red jumpsuits and Salvador Dali masks. Visually, Money Heist develops an extremely recognizable identity. The red jumpsuits and Salvador Dali masks become symbols associated with the group. These costumes serve practical purposes within the story, but their symbolic meaning becomes even more important. The masks hide individual identities. At the same time, they create a shared identity. The criminals stop looking like separate people and start appearing as one collective force. The red color also creates a strong visual contrast, making the group immediately recognizable. Over time, these images become closely associated with rebellion and resistance. This is an example of how costume design can become part of storytelling rather than simply decoration. Bella Ciao and the power of music. Music plays a major role in shaping the emotional identity of Money Heist. One of the most important musical elements is Bella Ciao, an Italian song historically associated with resistance and political struggle. Within the series, the song becomes much more than background music. It represents resistance, solidarity, and defiance. Its repeated use connects the fictional heist to larger ideas about freedom and rebellion. This is one reason the soundtrack is so memorable. The series understands that audiences do not remember stories only through dialogue. They remember images. They remember music. They remember symbols. And Money Heist combines all three. Is the professor a hero or a criminal? This is one of the most interesting questions raised by the series. The professor commits crimes. His group breaks laws. They take hostages. They threaten institutions. So why do many viewers find themselves supporting them? The answer is the way the story frames their motivations. The series frequently encourages viewers to question conventional ideas about power and morality. The criminals are given personalities, histories, relationships, and vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, institutions are sometimes portrayed as rigid, political, or willing to use questionable methods. This creates moral ambiguity. However, the series does not require viewers to believe that everything the criminals do is justified. Instead, it asks viewers to think. That is an important distinction. A compelling crime drama does not necessarily tell the audience who is good and who is evil. Sometimes it presents conflicting perspectives and allows the audience to wrestle with them. Money as a symbol. The title itself focuses on money, but the series uses money to explore larger ideas. Money represents power. It determines opportunity. It influences social status. It can create freedom, but it can also create dependence. The professor's approach to money is particularly interesting because the operation is designed around creating new currency rather than simply taking existing money. That concept gives the story a symbolic dimension. The criminals are not merely stealing wealth from one individual. They are challenging the financial system itself. The story therefore invites viewers to think about who controls money, who benefits from institutions, and why society accepts certain forms of wealth as valuable. The difference between planning and reality. One of the biggest lessons of Money Heist is that planning can only take you so far. The professor prepares for countless possibilities. But reality constantly produces new problems. People fall in love. People panic. People become angry. People make mistakes. People change their minds. That is why the story remains unpredictable. If everything followed the professor's plan perfectly, there would be little drama. The tension comes from watching reality collide with his carefully constructed strategy. The series repeatedly asks whether intelligence is enough to overcome chaos. Sometimes the answer appears to be yes. At other times, the smallest emotional decision threatens the entire operation. From Spanish series to global phenomenon. When Money Heist originally premiered on Spanish television network Antena 3 on May 2, 2017, it was planned as a two-part limited series consisting of 15 episodes. Its initial Spanish television performance was not the overwhelming global phenomenon it would later become. The situation changed dramatically after Netflix acquired the international rights. The first part became available internationally in late 2017, allowing audiences around the world to discover the series. The response was extraordinary. A Spanish-language crime drama suddenly became a global cultural phenomenon. Netflix eventually acquired the rights from Atresmedia Television and ordered additional episodes. The story continued through 3 further parts, expanding the original narrative far beyond its initial concept. The 5th and final part was released in 2 volumes in 2021, bringing the main story to its conclusion. This transformation demonstrates the power of streaming platforms. A television series originally produced for one country's audience could suddenly reach viewers across continents. Why the series became so popular? There are several reasons for the worldwide popularity of Money Heist. First is its characters. Viewers do not simply watch the heist. They become emotionally invested in the people involved. Second is suspense. The story constantly creates situations where success seems possible and failure seems equally likely. Third is its visual identity. The red jumpsuits, Dali masks, and recurring symbols make the series instantly recognizable. Fourth is its emotional storytelling. Romance, friendship, family, betrayal, grief, and sacrifice are integrated into the crime narrative. Finally, the series explores themes that can resonate internationally. Questions about power, inequality, authority, freedom, identity, and resistance do not belong to one country. They can be understood by audiences around the world. The expansion of the franchise. The success of the original series eventually transformed Money Heist into a larger media franchise. A South Korean adaptation titled Money Heist, Korea, Joint Economic Area was released in 2 parts in 2022. The adaptation transferred the basic concept into a different political and social environment while retaining recognizable elements from the original premise. The franchise also expanded through the spin-off series Berlin, which premiered in December 2023 and focused on the character of Berlin. The universe also received documentary treatment. Money Heist, the phenomenon explored the worldwide impact of the series, while Money Heist, From Tokyo to Berlin provided behind-the-scenes material connected to the production. A video game was also released in 2024, demonstrating how the franchise expanded beyond television. Strengths of Money Heist. The biggest strength of Money Heist is undoubtedly its ability to create emotional investment. The audience is encouraged to care about characters who are committing crimes. That is not easy to accomplish. The series also excels at cliffhanger. Episodes frequently end at moments designed to make viewers immediately want to continue watching. Another strength is its character diversity. Different members of the group represent different personalities and approaches to life. Some are calm. Some are impulsive. Some are compassionate. Some are aggressive. Some are highly disciplined. Others struggle with their emotions. This variety produces conflict naturally. The professor's intellectual battle with the authorities is another major strength. Rather than relying only on physical action, the series frequently uses negotiation, deception, strategy, and psychological manipulation. Weaknesses and criticism. Despite its strengths, Money Heist is not perfect. As the story expands, some viewers may feel that certain situations become increasingly dramatic or improbable. The original concept was relatively contained, but its later continuation naturally required larger conflicts and increasingly dangerous situations. Some character decisions can also appear frustrating because they create problems that might have been avoided through communication. But this is partly the point. The series is fundamentally about people. People are unpredictable. If every character behaved logically at every moment, the emotional drama would disappear. Still, viewers who prefer tightly realistic crime stories may find some developments overly theatrical. The series prioritizes emotional intensity and entertainment over strict realism. The deeper meaning of the story. At its heart, Money Heist is not really about stealing money. It is about power. Who has it? Who controls it? Who gets to decide what is legal? And what happens when ordinary people decide to challenge established authority? The series does not provide simple answers. Instead, it creates a world in which criminals can become symbols, institutions can appear flawed, and viewers can find themselves questioning their own assumptions. That moral uncertainty is one of the reasons the story became so widely discussed. The professor's group becomes more than a collection of criminals. They become a symbol that different viewers can interpret in different ways. For some, they represent rebellion. For others, they represent criminality disguised as heroism. For others, they are simply fascinating fictional characters caught in an extraordinary situation. The series works because it leaves room for all of these interpretations. Final verdict. Money Heist, or La Casa de Papel, began as a Spanish television crime drama in 2017 and developed into a worldwide franchise. Its journey from a relatively contained Spanish series to an international phenomenon is almost as remarkable as the heists within the story itself. The series combines clever planning, unpredictable characters, emotional relationships, psychological warfare, political symbolism, memorable costumes, powerful music, and relentless suspense. At the center is the professor, a mastermind who believes preparation can overcome almost anything. But the story repeatedly proves that the greatest variable cannot be calculated: human emotion. That is ultimately what makes Money Heist so engaging. The robbers may have maps, strategies, weapons, disguises, escape plans, and backup plans, but they cannot completely control love, fear, anger, loyalty, jealousy, or sacrifice. And when those emotions collide with an almost impossible plan, the result is a crime story that becomes something much more personal. For a YouTube movie and series analysis channel, Money Heist offers countless subjects to explore: the professor's strategy, Tokyo's narration, Berlin's psychology, Nairobi's leadership, the relationship between criminals and authorities, the meaning of the Dali masks, the symbolism of Bella Ciao, the use of flashbacks, and the question of whether the audience should actually support the robbers. Most importantly, the series demonstrates that a successful crime drama does not need to depend solely on action. Sometimes the most exciting battle is fought with information. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon is a secret. Sometimes a single emotional decision can be more powerful than an entire army. And sometimes the greatest heist is not simply the money taken from a vault, it is the audience's perception of who the real heroes and villains are. That is the lasting appeal of Money Heist. It takes a seemingly straightforward robbery and transforms it into a story about identity, freedom, loyalty, rebellion, power, and the complicated nature of human beings. And that is why, years after its original 2017 debut, Money Heist remains one of the most recognizable Spanish-language television successes of the streaming era. Money Heist, 2017. From a small Spanish heist series to a global phenomenon introduction. Before Money Heist became a worldwide television phenomenon, it was simply an ambitious Spanish crime drama created by a group of filmmakers who wanted to experiment with an exciting new idea. Known originally as La Casa de Papel, the series eventually became famous around the world for its intelligent heists, memorable characters, red jumpsuits, Salvador Dali masks, emotional storytelling, and unforgettable musical moments. But the most fascinating part of Money Heist is not only what happens inside the story. Its own journey from an uncertain Spanish television project to a global streaming sensation is almost a story worthy of the professor himself. The series was created by Alex Pina, who worked closely with director Jesus Colmena. Their collaboration had already developed over several years, but the idea that would eventually become Money Heist took shape during their time working together at Globo Media. After years of collaboration, Pina and Colmena decided to take a major professional risk. Instead of continuing under their previous production environment, they wanted to establish their own creative company and develop projects without the same external pressures. That decision would eventually lead to one of the most successful Spanish-language television franchises ever created. The idea was born from creative ambition. The origins of Money Heist can be traced back to the working relationship between Alex Pina and Jesus Colmena. The two had crossed paths professionally at Globo Media, and by the time they began developing their own production company, they already understood each other's creative strengths. In spring 2016, after production on the second season of Locked Up had ended, Pina and Colmena left Globo Media. They established their own production company, Vancouver Media. At that point, they had several possibilities for their company's first project. One option was a comedy. The other was a heist story designed for television. Eventually, they chose the heist concept. This decision was important because a robbery story might sound straightforward on paper, but transforming it into a television series presented an enormous creative challenge. A conventional heist movie might have 2 hours to introduce its characters, establish the plan, create complications, and reach the conclusion. A television series needs much more. It must constantly create new conflicts while keeping viewers emotionally invested. The creators therefore needed more than a robbery. They needed a world. They needed characters with complicated personalities. They needed secrets, relationships, betrayals, psychological battles, and enough uncertainty to keep the audience asking what would happen next. From The Evicted to Money Heist. During development, the project had a very different working title, Los Desahuciados, which can be translated as The Evicted. That title already hinted at an important idea. The characters would not simply be ordinary criminals. They would be people who felt pushed outside conventional society in different ways. This idea eventually became an important part of the show's emotional identity. Pina and Colmena developed the project alongside former Globo Media and Locked Up colleagues. They approached it as something of a passion project. The team wanted the freedom to experiment with storytelling techniques and creative ideas without unnecessary outside interference. This attitude helped shape the unusual style that would later distinguish Money Heist from many conventional crime dramas. The creators were not simply trying to reproduce a familiar robbery story. They wanted to ask how far a carefully planned heist could be stretched as television drama. What happens when a robbery lasts for days? What happens when the criminals and hostages are trapped together? What happens when the police begin to understand the plan? And what happens when the criminals themselves start falling apart emotionally? These questions became the foundation of the series. The pitch that changed everything. Eventually, Alex Pina presented the project to Sonia Martinez, who was then head of fiction at Atresmedia. The response was essentially the green light the creators needed. The project could move forward. In November 2016, Money Heist was officially announced as a limited television series. That detail is important because the creators initially wanted the story to remain focused rather than becoming an unnecessarily long production. Alex Pina had become concerned that extending stories simply for the sake of continuation could weaken them. He therefore approached Money Heist with a relatively contained vision. The idea was not to create an endless crime franchise. It was to tell a specific story with a clear structure. Ironically, the series would later become so successful that its original boundaries would be dramatically expanded. But at this early stage, nobody could know how enormous the project would eventually become. A limited series becomes 2 parts. The production was structured as a limited series divided into 2 parts. The decision to shoot the 2 parts back-to-back was influenced partly by financial considerations. This meant the production team had to plan carefully. The actors, locations, schedules, costumes, sets, and technical requirements all had to work together. A heist series can be particularly demanding because it requires the audience to believe that the same environment is continuously functioning as a believable location. The production therefore had to maintain consistency while filming a story involving many characters and complicated situations. At the same time, the creators had to establish the visual language that would eventually become one of the series' trademarks. The world of Money Heist needed to feel tense, stylish, dangerous, and emotionally intimate. Casting the team. Casting took place toward the end of 2016. The creators needed performers capable of making a group of criminals feel like real human beings rather than stereotypes. That was essential. The audience needed to care about the characters. If the robbers were simply presented as faceless criminals, the emotional power of the story would disappear. Instead, the characters were given different personalities, histories, motivations, strengths, and weaknesses. The eventual ensemble became one of the defining elements of the series. The professor was the strategist. Tokyo was impulsive and emotionally intense. Berlin was authoritative and unpredictable. Nairobi was passionate and determined. Rio was younger and emotionally vulnerable. Denver was energetic and complicated. Moscow was experienced and protective. Helsinki and Oslo brought physical strength and loyalty. Each character occupied a different position within the group. That diversity created natural conflict. Filming begins in January 2017. Filming began in late January 2017. This was a remarkably fast development timeline considering how much planning a major television production requires. The series had moved from concept to development, casting, and production within a relatively short period. But speed did not mean the creators had abandoned ambition. The production aimed to build a distinctive visual identity and a suspenseful narrative structure. The filmmakers had to balance large-scale scenes with intimate character moments. A hostage situation can look spectacular, but the audience must also understand what individual characters are feeling. That combination became a major part of the series' appeal. The first premiere. On May 2, 2017, Money Heist premiered on Antena 3. The first episode immediately attracted significant attention. In fact, it became the most watched premiere for a Spanish series since Down Below in April 2015. At first, this looked like an extremely promising beginning. The concept was fresh. The cast attracted attention. Netflix enters the story. Before the original series finished its Spanish run, Netflix had already recognized its potential. Netflix acquired the series in July 2017 and planned an international release. This decision would transform Money Heist. After the first part concluded, Netflix included the series in its Spanish catalog. Then came the international release. On December 20, 2017, roughly 1 month after the series had finished on Antena 3, Netflix released the first part outside Spain. There was an extraordinary twist. Netflix did not launch the series with a huge promotional campaign. There was no massive global marketing event designed to convince millions of people to watch it immediately. Instead, the series quietly appeared on the service. And then audiences discovered it. Word spread. Viewers recommended it to friends. Social media discussions increased. People began talking about the characters. The masks became recognizable. The red jumpsuits became symbolic. The professor became one of television's most memorable masterminds. And the show started traveling across borders. The international release was re-edited. For international audiences, Netflix did not simply present the Spanish television episodes exactly as they originally aired. The first 9 70-minute episodes were recut into 13 episodes of approximately 50 minutes each. The second part was also restructured. Its 6 original episodes were turned into 9 episodes for the international release. This restructuring helped make the series better suited to Netflix's viewing format. The shorter episode structure also created more frequent stopping points and cliffhanger. For modern streaming audiences, that was particularly effective. A viewer could finish one episode and immediately feel compelled to start another. This helped strengthen the binge-watching experience. The surprise success? Nobody involved could have predicted exactly what happened next. Money Heist became an unexpected international hit. The Spanish series, which had struggled with declining ratings on its original television network, found a huge audience through Netflix. This was one of the most fascinating transformations in modern television. A program could struggle under one distribution model and flourish under another. Traditional television depended heavily on scheduled viewing. Streaming changed the equation. Viewers could watch whenever they wanted. They could watch several episodes in one sitting. They could discover a show months after its original release. They could recommend it to viewers in other countries. Language was no longer an absolute barrier. Subtitles and dubbing allowed the Spanish-language production to reach audiences across the world. The result was extraordinary. At the time, Money Heist became the most-watched foreign-language series on Netflix. Its success proved that international audiences were willing to embrace stories far beyond the traditional Hollywood system. Why Netflix changed the fate of the series? The success of Money Heist demonstrates how distribution can influence a show's cultural impact. On Spanish television, viewers had to follow a specific schedule. On Netflix, international audiences could discover the series at their own pace. That difference was enormous. A viewer could watch an episode late at night. Another could watch an entire part over a weekend. Someone could recommend the series online. A new audience could discover it months later. The show was no longer restricted by geography or broadcast schedules. The streaming environment gave Money Heist something it had not fully possessed during its original television run: time to find its audience. Netflix buys the rights. The success became impossible to ignore. In April 2018, after the second part had become available on Netflix, Netflix purchased the rights to Money Heist from Atresmedia. Then came an announcement that completely changed the future of the franchise. Netflix would produce a third part. The limited series was no longer simply a finished Spanish television project. It had become a global Netflix production. The creators now had the opportunity to continue the story on a much larger scale. But that created a new challenge. How do you continue a story that was originally designed to end? The answer was to expand the universe while maintaining the emotional core. The third part. The third part was produced alongside an additional fourth part, continuing the strategy of shooting multiple sections of the story together. It eventually premiered on July 19, 2019. The scale of the series had grown. The audience had grown. Expectations had grown. The pressure had grown too. The characters were no longer simply known in Spain. They had become internationally recognized. The creators therefore had to balance what made the original story special with the expectations of a much larger audience. The result continued the franchise's emphasis on elaborate planning, emotional conflicts, dramatic reversals, and larger stakes. The fourth part. The fourth part arrived on April 3, 2020. Its timing was particularly significant because global audiences were spending far more time at home during the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic. Streaming consumption was increasing dramatically during this period, and Money Heist benefited from an audience that was increasingly turning to television for entertainment. The fourth part continued the story while intensifying the emotional and strategic conflicts. At this stage, the series had evolved far beyond the original limited series concept. The characters had become global icons. The red jumpsuits and dally masks had become instantly recognizable. The franchise had developed a cultural identity of its own. The fifth and final part. In July 2020, Netflix renewed Money Heist for a fifth and final part. This announcement confirmed that the main story would eventually reach its conclusion. The final part was divided into 2 volumes. The first volume was released on September 3, 2021. The second and final volume followed on December 3, 2021. The conclusion marked the end of the main television story. For viewers who had followed the characters from the beginning, it was the end of a journey that had started with a relatively small Spanish television production in 2017. The series had traveled from Antena 3 to Netflix. From Spain to the world. From a limited series to an international franchise. That transformation is one of the most remarkable parts of its history. The Korean remake. The success of Money Heist also demonstrated that its central concept could travel into completely different cultural environments. In June 2020, discussions began regarding a potential South Korean remake. The idea was eventually officially announced and approved in December 2020. The Korean adaptation became known as Money Heist, Korea, Joint Economic Area. Like the original, it was divided into 2 parts. The first part premiered on Netflix on June 24, 2022. The second part followed on December 9, 2022. Rather than simply copying every detail of the Spanish series, the Korean version adapted the premise to its own fictional political and social environment. This demonstrated the international strength of the original concept. A story about criminals, authority, money, identity, and resistance could be reinterpreted through another country's perspective. Berlin gets his own story. The popularity of Berlin created another opportunity. Berlin was one of the most controversial and memorable characters in the original series. Played by Pedro Alonso, the character had a distinctive personality that fascinated audiences. In November 2021, shortly before the final episodes of Money Heist, Netflix announced that a spin-off centered on Berlin was in development. The project would explore a different period of the character's life. This was an interesting decision because Berlin had already become one of the franchise's most recognizable figures. The spin-off allowed the creators to explore a character who had previously been part of a larger ensemble. The new series eventually became simply titled Berlin. It premiered on Netflix on December 29, 2023, expanding the Berlin cast. The spin-off introduced a new group of characters alongside Pedro Alonso. Michelle Jenner, Begonia Vargas, Tristan Ulloa, Julio Pina Fernandez, and Joel Sanchez joined the cast. The series also brought back familiar faces from the original universe. Itzira Tuno returned as Raquel Murillo, while Naja Nimri returned as Alicia Sierra. This connection helped establish that Berlin was not an unrelated project. It belonged to the same fictional universe. The production began filming in October 2022 in Paris, France, before continuing in Madrid, Spain. The choice of locations also reflected the larger scale of the franchise. The original story had expanded from a Spanish television production into an international entertainment property. The franchise beyond the main series. Money Heist did not stop with its main television story. The franchise expanded into documentaries. One of them, Money Heist, The Phenomenon, explored the unexpected worldwide success of the series. This is especially interesting because the show's international popularity was itself a remarkable phenomenon. The documentary format allowed audiences to examine how a Spanish-language production became a global cultural sensation. Another documentary project, Money Heist, From Tokyo to Berlin, offered behind-the-scenes perspectives on the production and the people responsible for bringing the series to life. These projects demonstrated that audiences were interested not only in the fictional characters but also in the real people and creative process behind the show. Why the story connected with audiences. The global success of Money Heist cannot be explained by one factor. It was the combination of several elements. The first was the characters. The audience did not simply watch a robbery. They followed people with emotional histories. They watched relationships develop. They witnessed disagreements. They saw loyalty tested. They experienced victories and losses with the characters. The second factor was suspense. The professor's plans created constant questions. Would the police discover him? Would the robbers escape? Would someone betray the group? Would an emotional decision destroy the operation? The story continually created uncertainty. Third was the visual identity. The red jumpsuits and dally masks were simple but extremely effective. They created a recognizable symbol that could exist outside the show itself. The power of symbols. One reason Money Heist became culturally powerful is that it created symbols people could instantly recognize. The dally mask became associated with the gang. The red jumpsuit became associated with rebellion. The city names became associated with the characters. And Bella Ciao became connected to the show's themes of resistance. These symbols helped the series exist beyond individual episodes. People who had never watched the show could still recognize the imagery. That is a major achievement for any television production. The importance of the professor. The professor is perhaps the most important ingredient in the show's concept. He transforms the heist from a conventional robbery into an intellectual contest. He does not simply tell the criminals what to do. He attempts to anticipate the authorities. He studies possibilities. He creates contingency plans. He understands that information can be more valuable than force. But the professor also demonstrates the limits of planning. He can predict police strategies. He can study security systems. He can calculate probabilities. What he cannot completely control is human emotion. That tension between logic and emotion drives much of the series. A story about more than crime. Although Money Heist is structured around criminal activity, the creators use the heists to explore larger ideas. The story raises questions about authority. It explores how institutions respond when challenged. It examines loyalty between people who have little reason to trust each other. It looks at how individuals construct new identities. It also explores why people sometimes become attracted to symbols of rebellion. These themes help explain why the series reached audiences far beyond Spain. The specific locations and characters may be fictional, but the questions are universal. And what happens when people refuse to accept the role society has assigned to them? From risky experiment to global brand. Looking back, the journey of Money Heist is almost unbelievable. In 2016, Alex Pina and Jesus Colmena were developing a new project through their recently established production company. In 2017, the series premiered in Spain. Its initial audience declined despite positive reviews. By the end of that year, the original series had finished. Then Netflix released it internationally with surprisingly little promotional support. Instead of disappearing into the enormous library of streaming content, it exploded. Audiences around the world discovered it. Netflix recognized its potential. The rights were acquired. New parts were produced. The series continued until 2021. A Korean remake followed in 2022. A Berlin spin-off arrived in 2023. Documentaries and a video game expanded the franchise even further. What started as a limited Spanish television project had become a global entertainment brand. Final analysis: the greatest heist was the unexpected success. Perhaps the most fascinating lesson from Money Heist is that its creators themselves could not have perfectly predicted what would happen. The series was designed as a limited story. Its original domestic ratings declined. Yet its international life became enormous. This makes the history of Money Heist strangely similar to the philosophy of the professor. The plan may be carefully constructed, but reality can always surprise you. Alex Pina and his collaborators created a series designed around intelligence, risk, unpredictability, and human behavior. Then the real world produced an unexpected twist. Netflix audiences transformed the fate of the show. The international success demonstrated that great stories do not necessarily need to originate from Hollywood to become global. A Spanish-language series could reach millions of viewers across continents. Characters could become international icons. A television production could create symbols recognizable far beyond its country of origin. And a project that began as an experimental passion project could become a major franchise. That is the extraordinary journey of Money Heist. It started with a creative team looking for a new challenge. It became a limited series. It struggled with declining domestic ratings. Then, almost unexpectedly, Netflix audiences discovered it. From there, everything changed. The series expanded from 2 parts to 5. Its world expanded from Spain to international adaptations. Its characters moved into spin-offs. Its production received documentary attention. And its imagery became part of global popular culture. For viewers, Money Heist may be remembered for the professor, Tokyo, Berlin, Nairobi, the red jumpsuits, the Dali masks, the heists, the emotional twists, and Bella Ciao. But behind all of those elements is another fascinating story, the story of how an ambitious Spanish television experiment became an international phenomenon. And perhaps that is the perfect ending to its history. The professor always believed that the impossible could become possible with enough preparation, patience, and courage. The creators of Money Heist discovered something similar in the real world. Sometimes, the biggest surprise is not whether the plan works. It is discovering just how far the plan can go. Money Heist, 2017 to 2021. The complete story of the professor, his team, and 2 impossible heists. Introduction: 2 heists, 1 extraordinary story. What if the world's most carefully planned robbery was not designed simply to steal money? What if the real objective was to challenge an entire system, manipulate the authorities, protect a friend, and prove that a group of people considered criminals could control the narrative? That is the fascinating premise behind Money Heist, originally titled La Casa de Papel. The Spanish crime drama, created by Alex Pina, follows a mysterious strategist known as the Professor and the group of criminals he brings together for two extraordinary operations. The first operation targets the Royal Mint of Spain. The second targets the Bank of Spain. But the story is never simply about entering a building and taking valuables. The real drama comes from what happens when intelligent planning collides with human emotion. The Professor can calculate police movements, security procedures, escape routes, and countless possible problems. What he cannot perfectly calculate is love. He cannot completely predict fear. He cannot control anger, jealousy, loyalty, betrayal, or grief. And that is what turns Money Heist from a conventional crime story into a character-driven thriller. The Professor, the architect behind the chaos. At the center of the story is Sergio Marquina, better known as the Professor. He is introduced as a mysterious man living in Madrid who has spent years developing an extraordinary plan. Unlike many fictional criminals, the Professor does not depend on physical intimidation. His strength is information. He studies his opponents. He researches institutions. He anticipates reactions. He creates contingency plans. Most importantly, he understands that winning a confrontation often depends on controlling information. The Professor knows that the police will have superior resources. They will have weapons, technology, trained officers, negotiators, investigators, and political support. So he creates a different kind of advantage. Preparation. He recruits 8 people with different criminal skills and gives them one important rule: they will not use their real names during the operation. Instead, they choose city names. This creates a new identity for every member of the group. Silene Oliveira becomes Tokyo. Andres de Fonalosa becomes Berlin. Agustin Ramos becomes Moscow. Agatha Jimenez becomes Nairobi. Anibal Cortez becomes Rio. Daniel Ramos becomes Denver. Mako Dragic becomes Helsinki. And Radko Dragic becomes Oslo. These names are more than disguises. They become identities. The characters begin to develop relationships as their new selves while still carrying the emotional baggage of their past lives. Tokyo, the voice of the story. Tokyo becomes one of the most important members of the group. She is also crucial to the way the story is told. Her personality is impulsive, passionate, brave, and unpredictable. This makes her both valuable and dangerous. The Professor's plan depends heavily on discipline. Tokyo does not always behave according to the plan. She acts emotionally. She takes risks. She sometimes reacts before thinking. Yet this same unpredictability can make her incredibly courageous. The audience experiences much of the story through Tokyo's perspective, which gives the series a personal and sometimes unreliable narrative style. Instead of simply observing the robbery from a distance, viewers are drawn into the emotional experience of someone trapped inside it. Tokyo is not a perfect hero. She makes mistakes. She creates problems. She also demonstrates extraordinary courage. That complexity is what makes her memorable. Berlin, the man who commands the mint. Andres de Fonalosa, known as Berlin, becomes the leader of the group inside the Royal Mint. He is intelligent, confident, sophisticated, and highly disciplined. But he is also capable of cruel and disturbing decisions. Berlin's personality creates one of the show's most complicated moral questions. Can an audience become fascinated by someone whose actions are often difficult to justify? The answer is one of the reasons the character works so well. Berlin is not written as a simple villain. He has charisma. He has intelligence. He has weaknesses. He has relationships. And he has his own understanding of loyalty and responsibility. His role during the first heist creates constant tension because the people inside the mint must follow his authority while also dealing with his unpredictable personality. Nairobi, the heart of the operation. Agatha Jimenez, known as Nairobi, becomes one of the most important members of the team. She has expertise that is particularly valuable during the first operation. But Nairobi's importance is not limited to her technical abilities. She often becomes a source of emotional strength. When other members lose confidence, Nairobi can push them forward. She understands that a team cannot survive simply because the Professor has designed a clever plan. People need motivation. They need trust. They need someone who believes in them. Nairobi often becomes that person. Her relationship with the others demonstrates one of the most important ideas in the series. The heist may have been created by the Professor, but it belongs emotionally to everyone involved. Moscow and Denver, a father and son inside the storm. Agustin Ramos, known as Moscow, brings experience and maturity to the team. His son Daniel, known as Denver, is very different. Their relationship creates one of the emotional foundations of the first heist. Moscow is protective. Denver is impulsive and emotional. The pressure of the robbery tests their relationship repeatedly. This is important because the criminals are not simply working for money. They are also trying to survive as human beings. The Royal Mint becomes a place where family relationships are tested under extraordinary pressure. Rio, the youngest and most vulnerable. Anibal Cortez, known as Rio, is one of the younger members of the team. His technical abilities make him valuable, but emotionally he is more vulnerable than some of the others. His relationship with Tokyo becomes one of the central emotional storylines. Their connection demonstrates how quickly personal relationships can complicate a carefully organized operation. The professor understands that emotional attachment can create weaknesses. But he also understands something deeper. People cannot simply turn their feelings off because a plan requires it. Rio's story eventually becomes one of the most important bridges between the first and second heists. Helsinki and Oslo, strength and loyalty. Mako and Radko Dragic, known as Helsinki and Oslo, provide physical strength to the group. But their importance is not limited to their size or intimidating appearance. They represent loyalty. Inside an environment filled with fear and suspicion, loyalty can be more valuable than physical strength. The brothers demonstrate how trust between team members can help the group survive situations where everything appears to be collapsing. The first heist, the Royal Mint of Spain. The professor's first major operation targets the Royal Mint of Spain. The goal is extraordinary. The team wants to enter the building, take control of the situation, and print a huge amount of new money. The target is not simply a vault containing existing cash. The team intends to use the mint's own facilities to produce the money. This creates an entirely different type of robbery. Time becomes the group's most important resource. The longer they remain inside, the more money they can potentially produce. But staying longer also gives the authorities more time to respond. That creates the central conflict. The criminals need time. The police need to reduce time. Every minute becomes part of the battle. Taking control of the mint. The group enters the Royal Mint and takes dozens of people hostage. The hostages immediately change the situation. The professor's plan depends on controlling the people inside while keeping the authorities outside uncertain. The criminals must maintain discipline. The hostages must be prevented from escaping, the money must be produced. And the police must be kept from successfully entering the building. It sounds almost impossible. And that is exactly why the professor has spent so much time preparing. The real battle begins outside. While the criminals are inside the mint, the professor remains outside. He becomes the invisible commander. His job is to monitor the police response and manipulate events from a distance. This creates a fascinating split-screen structure. Inside the mint, the gang deals with hostages, internal disagreements, and emotional pressure. Outside, the professor plays a psychological game with investigators. He must make sure the authorities never fully understand who he is. The police are not simply fighting 8 criminals. They are trying to find an invisible 9th member, the person controlling everything. The police versus the professor. The police investigation becomes one of the most exciting parts of the story. The authorities have resources. They have trained personnel. They have intelligence gathering capabilities. But the professor has spent years thinking about how the police might respond. He attempts to stay several steps ahead. This turns the heist into an intellectual battle. The police ask, "What will the robbers do next?" The professor asks, "What will the police think we will do next?" The deeper this game becomes, the harder it is for either side to maintain control. Why the first heist is more than a robbery. The Royal Mint operation works because the criminals are not simply trying to escape with money. They are trying to control time, information, public perception, and negotiation. The professor wants the authorities to believe certain things. He wants the police to make particular assumptions. He wants the operation to appear different from what it actually is. This creates a psychological battle rather than a simple physical confrontation. The audience constantly wonders whether the professor's plan will survive contact with reality. Because although he has prepared extensively, his team is still made up of human beings. And human beings make mistakes. Love complicates the plan. One of the central themes of Money Heist is the conflict between logic and emotion. The professor's plan is mathematical. His team, however, is emotional. Tokyo and Rio develop a romantic relationship. Other members form complicated bonds. People become jealous. People become afraid. People become attached. The more emotionally connected the group becomes, the more difficult it is to maintain complete control. This is one of the most realistic aspects of the story. No matter how carefully someone plans an operation, they cannot completely control human behavior. The first heist changes everyone. The Royal Mint operation becomes a transformative experience for the entire group. They enter as criminals with individual goals. But the experience changes their relationships. Some become closer. Some lose trust. Some discover courage they did not know they possessed. Others are forced to confront the consequences of their decisions. The robbery becomes a psychological journey. When the first operation eventually ends, the characters are no longer the same people who entered the Mint. And this transformation becomes essential to understanding the later story. Life after the Royal Mint. After the first heist, the members of the group attempt to disappear. They go into hiding. For a while, it appears that the professor's plan has succeeded. But the past does not stay buried. Eventually, Rio is captured after authorities intercept a phone. His capture changes everything. The group is forced to make a decision. They could remain hidden. Or they could return to the criminal world to protect him. The professor chooses the second option. And that decision launches the second major operation. The second heist, the Bank of Spain. The second major operation is even more ambitious. This time, the target is the Bank of Spain. But the objective is not simply to steal gold. The heist is connected directly to Rio's fate. The group wants to pressure the authorities into handing Rio over and preventing further mistreatment. This gives the second heist a deeply personal motivation. The operation is no longer simply about money. It is about loyalty. The group is effectively saying, "We will risk everything for one of our own." That emotional motivation makes the second heist different from the first. New members join the team. The professor's team expands for the second operation. New members include Martín Barot, known as Palermo, Santiago Lopez, known as Bogotá, and Jakov, known as Marseille. Each brings different skills and personality traits. Palermo is especially important because he has a strong connection to the professor's plans and shares an intense leadership style. Bogotá brings specialized expertise that becomes essential to the Bank of Spain operation. Marseille operates as a dependable member of the larger network. The expanded team makes the second heist more complex. More people mean more abilities. But they also mean more personalities. And more personalities mean more potential conflict. Entering the Bank of Spain. The Bank of Spain presents a completely different challenge. The first heist focused on printing money. The second centers on gold. The location is also heavily protected. The group knows that the authorities will react aggressively. They therefore need to move quickly while maintaining control. Once again, the operation becomes a battle of time and intelligence. The team must deal with hostages. The police must be held back. The gold must be handled. The professor must coordinate events from outside. And the entire operation must remain connected to the larger objective of protecting Rio. Palermo, a new source of conflict. Palermo is one of the most complicated additions to the group. He is intelligent, ambitious, confident, and capable of taking charge. But his personality creates tension. Leadership becomes a recurring problem. Who should make decisions when the professor is not physically present? Can everyone trust Palermo? Can Palermo control his emotions? The second heist repeatedly demonstrates that the greatest threat may not always come from outside. Sometimes the biggest danger is conflict inside the team. This is a recurring principle throughout Money Heist. The police can be studied. Security systems can be analyzed. Buildings can be mapped. But people are unpredictable. The gold operation. The Bank of Spain heist introduces one of the most visually distinctive elements of the series, the attempt to access and handle the bank's enormous gold reserves. The gold becomes both a physical objective and a symbol. It represents wealth, power, and the authority of the institution. By targeting it, the gang once again challenges an established symbol of financial power. But the gold also creates enormous practical difficulties. The operation is far more complicated than simply taking bars and carrying them away. This allows the series to create tension through logistics, teamwork, time pressure, and improvisation. Hostages again. As in the first heist, the group takes hostages. But by this stage, the authorities understand that the criminals have experience. They know that the gang has successfully managed a previous operation. The police therefore cannot simply repeat their earlier strategy. Both sides have learned. That makes the second conflict more dangerous. The professor's opponents know more about him. Money Heist, Korea, Joint Economic Area, 2022. The heist that turns a divided nation into a battlefield. Introduction. When a famous heist enters a new world. What happens when a famous crime story is taken out of its original setting and rebuilt inside a completely different political and social environment? That is the central idea behind Money Heist, Korea, Joint Economic Area, the 2022 South Korean adaptation of the internationally successful Spanish series Money Heist. Instead of simply copying the original story, the Korean adaptation places the familiar heist concept inside an imagined future in which North and South Korea have moved toward reunification. At first, that sounds like a hopeful future. After decades of division, people from both sides can finally move between territories. A new economic zone is created. Businesses begin operating together. People have new opportunities. But beneath this apparent prosperity is a darker reality. The benefits of economic integration are not shared equally. Those with wealth and power gain enormous advantages, while many ordinary people struggle. And this social inequality becomes the foundation for a new version of the professor's impossible heist. The result is a crime thriller that combines the familiar elements of money heist with Korean political and social themes. A different world, a familiar idea. The original money heist is built around the idea that a group of criminals can challenge a powerful financial institution through intelligence, preparation, and teamwork. The Korean version keeps that basic structure. But instead of Spain, the story takes place on the Korean peninsula. The fictional world imagines a reunified Korea. North and South Korea have moved toward greater cooperation, and a joint economic area has been created. The concept is fascinating because reunification initially appears to offer hope. People can move across former borders. Businesses can expand. Economic activity increases. The old division begins to disappear. But progress has a price. The series suggests that economic integration does not automatically create equality. Some people become wealthier. Others remain trapped at the bottom of society. This gives the remake a strong social foundation. The heist is therefore not simply about money. It becomes connected to questions about wealth, inequality, opportunity, political power, and social division. The joint economic area. The joint economic area is at the center of this fictional world. It represents cooperation between the two Koreas. But it also represents the contradictions of that cooperation. On the surface, the area symbolizes a new future. It suggests that old political divisions can be overcome. Yet the series presents another side. Economic power becomes concentrated among people who already possess resources and influence. Ordinary citizens do not necessarily experience the same benefits. This creates frustration. And frustration creates an environment in which rebellion becomes easier to understand. The creators use this setting to make the heist feel like more than a criminal operation. It becomes a confrontation with a system that many characters believe has failed them. Park Sun-ho, the Korean professor. At the center of the story is Park Sun-ho, played by Yoo Ji-tae. He is the Korean equivalent of the professor. Like the original character, he is a strategist who understands that intelligence can sometimes be more powerful than physical force. He recruits a group of criminals and gives them a carefully structured plan. The professor does not want random chaos. He wants controlled chaos. That distinction is essential. The group will enter the mint, take hostages, print an enormous amount of money, and attempt to survive long enough to escape. But Sun-ho's greatest weapon is not a weapon at all. It is his ability to anticipate human behavior. He understands that the authorities will try to predict the criminals. So he tries to predict the authorities first. This creates a psychological chess match. The city names return. One of the most recognizable features of the original series returns in the Korean adaptation. The criminals use city names instead of their real identities. This includes Tokyo, Berlin, Moscow, Nairobi, Rio, Denver, Helsinki, and Oslo. The city names serve several purposes. First, they protect the criminals' identities. Second, they create a shared identity. Third, they connect the Korean adaptation to the global language of the original franchise. But there is also something symbolic about this decision. The characters come from different backgrounds. Yet inside the heist, their individual histories become secondary. They become members of one group. Their city names effectively create a new family. Tokyo, a new identity. Lee Hongdan becomes Tokyo. Like her counterpart in the original series, she is one of the most important and unpredictable members of the group. Tokyo is not simply a cold criminal. She has emotions, fears, frustrations, and dreams. Her background also connects strongly with the social tensions of the Korean setting. She represents someone who has experienced hardship and alienation. When she becomes part of the professor's team, she enters a world where she can redefine herself. The city name, Tokyo, becomes more than a disguise. It becomes an identity. Inside the mint, she has to make decisions that could affect everyone. Her impulsive personality creates conflict, but her courage also makes her essential. Berlin, the most dangerous personality in the room. Song Jung-ho becomes Berlin. Played by Park Ha-soo, Berlin is one of the most intimidating members of the team. He is intelligent, disciplined, and commanding. But he is also emotionally complicated. His behavior inside the mint creates tension because his methods can clash with the professor's larger strategy. The character represents authority within the criminal group. The professor controls the operation from outside. Berlin becomes one of the main forces controlling the situation inside. That creates an interesting division of power. One man controls the plan. Another controls the people. And when those two forms of authority disagree, the entire operation becomes vulnerable. Moscow, experience and family. Omansik becomes Moscow. Money Heist, Korea, Joint Economic Area, 2022. The heist that turns a divided nation into a battlefield. Introduction. When a famous heist enters a new world. What happens when a famous crime story is taken out of its original setting and rebuilt inside a completely different political and social environment? That is the central idea behind Money Heist, Korea, Joint Economic Area, the 2022 South Korean adaptation of the internationally successful Spanish series Money Heist. Instead of simply copying the original story, the Korean adaptation places the familiar heist concept inside an imagined future in which North and South Korea have moved toward reunification. At first, that sounds like a hopeful future. After decades of division, people from both sides can finally move between territories. A new economic zone is created. Businesses begin operating together. People have new opportunities. But beneath this apparent prosperity is a darker reality. The benefits of economic integration are not shared equally. Those with wealth and power gain enormous advantages, while many ordinary people struggle. And this social inequality becomes the foundation for a new version of the professor's impossible heist. The result is a crime thriller that combines the familiar elements of Money Heist with Korean political and social themes. A different world, a familiar idea. The original Money Heist is built around the idea that a group of criminals can challenge a powerful financial institution through intelligence, preparation, and teamwork. The Korean version keeps that basic structure. But instead of Spain, the story takes place on the Korean peninsula. The fictional world imagines a reunified Korea. North and South Korea have moved toward greater cooperation, and a joint economic area has been created. The concept is fascinating because reunification initially appears to offer hope. People can move across former borders. Businesses can expand. Economic activity increases. The old division begins to disappear. But progress has a price. The series suggests that economic integration does not automatically create equality. Some people become wealthier. Others remain trapped at the bottom of society. This gives the remake a strong social foundation. The heist is therefore not simply about money. It becomes connected to questions about wealth, inequality, opportunity, political power, and social division. The Joint Economic Area. The Joint Economic Area is at the center of this fictional world. It represents cooperation between the two Koreas. But it also represents the contradictions of that cooperation. On the surface, the area symbolizes a new future. It suggests that old political divisions can be overcome. Yet the series presents another side. Economic power becomes concentrated among people who already possess resources and influence. Ordinary citizens do not necessarily experience the same benefits. This creates frustration. And frustration creates an environment in which rebellion becomes easier to understand. The creators use this setting to make the heist feel like more than a criminal operation. It becomes a confrontation with a system that many characters believe has failed them. Park Sun-ho, the Korean professor. At the center of the story is Park Sun-ho, played by Yoo Ji-tae. He is the Korean equivalent of the professor. Like the original character, he is a strategist who understands that intelligence can sometimes be more powerful than physical force. He recruits a group of criminals and gives them a carefully structured plan. The professor does not want random chaos. He wants controlled chaos. That distinction is essential. The group will enter the mint, take hostages, print an enormous amount of money, and attempt to survive long enough to escape. But Sun-ho's greatest weapon is not a weapon at all. It is his ability to anticipate human behavior. He understands that the authorities will try to predict the criminals. So he tries to predict the authorities first. This creates a psychological chess match. The city names return. One of the most recognizable features of the original series returns in the Korean adaptation. The criminals use city names instead of their real identities. This includes Tokyo, Berlin, Moscow, Nairobi, Rio, Denver, Helsinki, and Oslo. The city names serve several purposes. First, they protect the criminals' identities. Second, they create a shared identity. Third, they connect the Korean adaptation to the global language of the original franchise. But there is also something symbolic about this decision. The characters come from different backgrounds. Yet inside the heist, their individual histories become secondary. They become members of one group. Their city names effectively create a new family. Tokyo, a new identity. Lee Hongdan becomes Tokyo. Like her counterpart in the original series, she is one of the most important and unpredictable members of the group. Tokyo is not simply a cold criminal. She has emotions, fears, frustrations, and dreams. Her background also connects strongly with the social tensions of the Korean setting. She represents someone who has experienced hardship and alienation. When she becomes part of the professor's team, she enters a world where she can redefine herself. The city name, Tokyo, becomes more than a disguise. It becomes an identity. Inside the Mint, she has to make decisions that could affect everyone. Her impulsive personality creates conflict, but her courage also makes her essential. Berlin, the most dangerous personality in the room. Song Jung-ho becomes Berlin. Played by Park Ha-soo, Berlin is one of the most intimidating members of the team. He is intelligent, disciplined, and commanding. But he is also emotionally complicated. His behavior inside the Mint creates tension because his methods can clash with the professor's larger strategy. The character represents authority within the criminal group. The professor controls the operation from outside. Berlin becomes one of the main forces controlling the situation inside. That creates an interesting division of power. One man controls the plan. Another controls the people. And when those two forms of authority disagree, the entire operation becomes vulnerable. Moscow, experience and family. Oh Man-sik becomes Moscow. Helsinki and Oslo. Ko Myung-tae becomes Helsinki, while Lee Sang-yeon becomes Oslo. Both contribute physical strength and loyalty. Their presence reminds viewers that the professor's strategy requires different kinds of people. Some are specialists. Some are negotiators. Some are strategists. Some provide physical protection. The team functions because these abilities complement each other. But having different personalities also creates the possibility of conflict. That conflict becomes increasingly important once the hostage situation begins. The 4 trillion won plan. The central objective of the Korean adaptation is enormous. The group intends to carry out a 4 trillion Korean won's heist from the Mint located inside the joint economic area. The amount is so large that the operation immediately feels almost impossible. But that is exactly what the professor wants. He does not think like an ordinary robber. The plan depends on printing new money. The group does not simply steal existing banknotes. They use the Mint itself to produce the money. That means the most important resource is time. The longer the criminals remain inside, the more money they can potentially create. But the longer they remain inside, the more opportunities the police have to stop them. This creates a perfect dramatic conflict. The criminals need time. The police need to take time away from them. The Mint becomes a prison. Once the team enters the Mint and takes control of the hostages, the building becomes a closed world. The criminals are trapped inside with the people they are controlling. Outside, police forces surround the building. Nobody can simply walk away. The hostages cannot freely leave. The criminals cannot escape easily. The police cannot simply rush inside without considering the consequences. This creates a pressure cooker. Every decision matters. Every argument matters. Every negotiation matters. And every mistake can create a chain reaction. The hostages change everything. The hostages are an essential part of the story. They create a human element that prevents the heist from becoming purely mechanical. The criminals have to control them. But the hostages are not a single united group. Some cooperate. Some resist. Some panic. Some attempt to manipulate the criminals. Others look for opportunities to escape. The result is a constantly changing balance of power. A person who seems powerless can suddenly become important. Someone who appears loyal can change sides. Someone who seems confident can collapse under pressure. This unpredictability keeps the story tense. The police response. Outside the Mint, the authorities face a unique challenge. They are dealing with criminals who have prepared extensively. The professor has designed the operation around anticipating police behavior. But the police also have intelligence and strategy. This creates a battle between two groups trying to understand one another. The police ask, "What is the professor planning?" The professor asks, "What will the police think I am planning?" This creates a psychological game. The audience becomes part of that game. We know information that certain characters do not. That creates dramatic tension. Why the Korean setting matters. The most important difference between the Korean adaptation and the original series is the setting. The Spanish story is built around Spain's political and economic environment. The Korean adaptation uses a fictional reunified Korea. This allows the writers to explore different social questions. What happens when a country attempts to reunify? Who benefits economically? Who gets left behind? Can political cooperation eliminate inequality? What happens when economic progress creates new divisions? These questions give the Korean remake its own identity. The Heist becomes a metaphor for a society struggling to determine who truly benefits from change. Reunification as a background. The idea of Korean reunification is powerful because it carries enormous historical and political significance. The series does not simply present reunification as an uncomplicated happy ending. Instead, it imagines a complicated transition. The old borders disappear. A new economic system develops. People from different backgrounds meet. But economic inequality remains. This creates a fascinating contradiction. Political borders can disappear while social divisions remain. That idea becomes one of the central themes of the story. The series suggests that removing a physical boundary does not automatically remove inequality. The Professor's philosophy. The Professor's philosophy is one of the key elements connecting the Korean adaptation to the original. He believes that the system can be challenged. He does not see his group as ordinary criminals. From his perspective, they are exposing weaknesses in an economic structure that already disadvantages ordinary people. This does not automatically make their actions morally correct. And that is important. The series is not simply saying that crime is good. Instead, it presents a complicated moral argument. It asks viewers to think about why people become criminals. Are they motivated only by greed? Or can poverty, inequality, anger, and social exclusion influence their choices? The answer is complicated. And the complexity makes the story more engaging. Crime and social inequality. The Korean adaptation places stronger emphasis on economic inequality. The joint economic area creates wealth, but that wealth does not reach everyone equally. Some people gain opportunities. Others remain disadvantaged. This creates resentment. The Heist therefore becomes connected to a larger social conflict. The criminals want money. But they also want to expose what they believe is an unfair system. This creates an important contrast. The authorities see a criminal group attacking a financial institution. The criminals see themselves as people challenging a system. The truth, of course, is more complicated. That ambiguity is what makes the series interesting. The Professor versus the authorities. The central intellectual battle remains the same. The Professor wants to stay several steps ahead. The authorities want to understand his strategy. Both sides rely on information. Both sides attempt to manipulate the other. Both sides must predict human behavior. This is why the series can remain suspenseful even when there is no major physical action. A conversation can be dangerous. A lie can change everything. A small piece of information can destroy an entire strategy. The battle is fought with psychology as much as with force. The symbolism of the masks. The Dali masks of the original series are replaced within the Korean adaptation's own cultural context, but the broader idea remains. The criminals hide their identities. They become symbols rather than individuals. This has an important effect. When people wear masks, their personal identities become less visible. They become representatives of a larger idea. That is exactly what the Professor needs. The group is no longer just 8 individuals. They become a collective, city names as global symbols. The city names also remain. Tokyo, Berlin, Moscow, Nairobi, Rio, Denver, Helsinki, Oslo. This connects the Korean version to the original franchise. But it also creates an interesting contrast. The story is deeply Korean in its political setting, yet the characters carry international identities. This reflects the global nature of the franchise. The original series became internationally popular partly because its characters could represent ideas that audiences understood regardless of nationality. The Korean remake continues that tradition. The role of family. Family is another important theme. Moscow and Denver's relationship is especially significant. Their presence inside the mint demonstrates how family relationships can influence criminal decisions. A person may be willing to take risks for themselves, but they may take even greater risks for someone they love. That emotional motivation creates tension. It also makes the characters easier for viewers to understand. They may be criminals, but they are still people with families, fears, and emotional attachments. The moral ambiguity of the Heist. One of the strongest aspects of Money Heist, Korea, is that it does not make morality completely simple. The criminals are committing a major crime. They take hostages. They threaten the authorities. They plan to produce an enormous amount of money. Those actions have consequences. At the same time, the series explores the social conditions that helped create their anger and desperation. This creates moral ambiguity. The viewer can understand a character's motivation without necessarily approving their actions. That distinction is extremely important for responsible YouTube analysis. Rather than presenting criminal behavior as something to imitate or celebrate, the story can be discussed as fictional entertainment that explores difficult questions about power and inequality. Why the story is so engaging. The Korean adaptation combines several storytelling elements. There is suspense. There is action. There is strategy. There are family relationships. There are political themes. There is social commentary. There are mysteries surrounding the characters. And there is the constant question. Can the professor's plan actually work? Every episode can introduce a new problem. The criminals may believe they have control. Then the hostages create an unexpected complication. The authorities may believe they have discovered a weakness. Then the professor responds with another strategy. This cycle keeps the audience engaged. The difference between the two versions. The original Money Heist and the Korean adaptation share the same basic foundation. Both feature a criminal mastermind known as the Professor. A team using city names. A major mint heist, hostages, police negotiations. A plan to print money, conflicts between team members, themes of inequality and rebellion. But the Korean adaptation adds a new layer through its fictional reunified Korea. The joint economic area becomes a major part of the story's identity. Instead of simply asking questions about Spain's institutions, the Korean series explores what could happen when political reunification and economic integration create new inequalities. That makes the adaptation more than a simple copy. It becomes a reinterpretation. The professor's greatest weapon. The professor's greatest weapon is ultimately not money. It is information. He understands that people make decisions based on what they believe to be true. If he can control what the authorities know, he can influence what they do. This idea is central to both versions of the story. It also explains why the professor rarely needs to be physically present. He can influence events from a distance. He becomes the invisible force behind the operation. The real battle is psychological. At first glance, Money Heist, Korea appears to be an action thriller. But underneath the action is a psychological battle. The criminals must convince the hostages that cooperation is safer than resistance. The police must convince the criminals that surrender is their best option. The professor must convince the authorities that they understand the situation. And the authorities must convince the public that they remain in control. Everyone is attempting to control the narrative. That is what makes the story more sophisticated than a simple robbery plot. Final verdict. Money Heist, Korea, Joint Economic Area takes the basic concept of the Spanish original and moves it into a completely different fictional environment. Instead of Madrid, the story unfolds within an imagined reunified Korea. Instead of simply focusing on a conventional financial institution, the story places the heist inside a joint economic area that represents both cooperation and inequality. At the center is Park Sun-ho, the professor, who assembles a team of criminals and gives them city identities. Tokyo, Berlin, Moscow, Nairobi, Rio, Denver, Helsinki, and Oslo become part of an operation designed to produce 4 trillion Korean wons. But the money is only one layer of the story. The deeper conflict concerns power. Who controls wealth? Who benefits from economic integration? Who is left behind? Can political reunification create genuine equality? And what happens when people who believe they have been ignored decide to challenge the system? These questions give the Korean adaptation its own identity. The mint becomes more than a building. It becomes a symbol of economic power. The hostages become more than people trapped inside. The impossible heist remains. The hostages remain. The psychological battle remains. But the world surrounding them has changed. And that change allows the story to explore new questions about reunification, inequality, wealth, identity, and power. For a YouTube movie or series analysis channel, the most interesting conclusion is that the Korean adaptation is not simply asking whether a group of criminals can successfully rob a mint. It is asking something much larger. What happens when people who feel excluded by a new society decide to challenge the system that promised them a better future? That question gives the heist its emotional and social weight. Behind the masks are individuals. Behind the money is inequality. Behind the robbery is rebellion. And behind the professor's plan is a much bigger question about who truly benefits when society changes. That combination of crime, suspense, emotion, and social commentary is what makes Money Heist, Korea, Joint Economic Area an intriguing chapter in the larger Money Heist universe. Berlin, 2023, present. The master thief. Before Money Heist introduction, before the professor, there was Berlin. Before Berlin became one of the most recognizable figures in Money Heist, before he stood inside the Royal Mint of Spain wearing the famous red jumpsuit, and before audiences discovered the complicated man behind his cold confidence, there was another chapter of his life waiting to be told. That chapter is explored in the Spanish series Berlin, a spin-off set in an undefined period before the events of Money Heist. Rather than following the professor and his famous crew, the series moves the spotlight toward Andres de Fonalosa, better known as Berlin. And this time, the objective is not to print money. It is not to take over a major financial institution. Instead, Berlin prepares one of the most ambitious jewel robberies of his career. The target? Jewelry worth approximately 44 million euros. But Berlin does not want to steal it through a simple smash-and-grab operation. He wants the robbery to feel like an illusion. For him, the perfect crime is not merely about taking something valuable. It is about creating a performance so convincing that, by the time everyone understands what happened, the thief is already gone. That idea perfectly matches Berlin's personality. He is a criminal, but he sees himself as an artist. He loves elegance. He loves strategy. He enjoys manipulating expectations. And, perhaps most importantly, he loves the feeling of being one step ahead of everyone else. But there is a problem. Berlin may be a brilliant thief, but he is also an extremely complicated human being. He can be arrogant. He can be impulsive. He can become emotionally attached. And his obsession with romance repeatedly threatens to interfere with his carefully designed plans. That combination of intelligence, confidence, ego, emotion, and danger becomes the foundation of Berlin. Berlin at his prime. The series takes place before the events of the original Money Heist. This is important because the audience gets to see Berlin during an earlier stage of his criminal career. He is not yet the man viewers know from the Royal Mint. Instead, he is still developing his reputation. He has already completed major robberies and has experience working with different groups. The story describes him as someone who has participated in several criminal teams throughout his life. This background helps explain why Berlin is so confident. He has experience. He knows how criminals behave. He understands security. He understands people. And he knows that every successful robbery depends on much more than courage. It requires timing. It requires trust. It requires deception. And it requires knowing when to disappear. The new series gives viewers the opportunity to explore that side of Berlin in greater depth. The 44 million euro jewel heist. At the center of the story is Berlin's extraordinary plan to steal jewels worth around 44 million euros. But the value of the jewels is only part of what makes the operation fascinating. Berlin wants the robbery to resemble an illusionist's performance. That tells us a lot about his character. An ordinary thief might focus entirely on the prize. Berlin is fascinated by the process. He wants the authorities and everyone around him to believe one version of events while the real operation is happening somewhere else. In his mind, the perfect crime is a performance. The audience watches. The magician performs the trick. Everyone believes they understand what they saw. Then the magician reveals that the truth was completely different. Berlin wants to become that magician. The jewels are the prize. But the real satisfaction comes from making the impossible look believable. Berlin's greatest strength, his mind. Berlin's physical presence is intimidating, but his greatest weapon is his mind. He is constantly evaluating people. He watches how they speak. He studies their reactions. He notices weaknesses. He understands confidence and fear. And he knows that people can often be manipulated more easily than security systems. This becomes essential to his criminal philosophy. A security system can be studied. A locked door can be opened. A camera can be avoided. But human behavior is much more unpredictable. Berlin therefore surrounds himself with people who possess different abilities. Instead of attempting everything alone, he creates a specialized team. Each person has a role. Each person contributes something different. And Berlin becomes the person connecting all those pieces together. The new crew. For this extraordinary robbery, Berlin brings together a group of specialists. The team includes Kayla, played by Michelle Jenna-Damian, played by Tristan Ulloa Cameron, played by Begonia Vargas Bruce, played by Joel Sanchez-Roy, played by Julio Pina Fernandez. Each member has a different personality and skill set. This is important because Berlin's plan is too complicated for one person. The crew must work together. But teamwork creates another problem. Trust. How much can Berlin trust these people? And how much can they trust Berlin? A successful heist requires cooperation. Yet every criminal involved knows that the person standing beside them could potentially become a weakness. This creates a subtle layer of tension. Kayla, intelligence and technology. Kayla is one of the most interesting members of Berlin's new crew. She brings intelligence and technical ability to the operation. Her presence demonstrates how modern criminal plans depend on more than traditional skills. Technology can change the way information is gathered, communication is handled, and complex operations are coordinated. But Kayla is also more than a technical specialist. Her personality creates an interesting contrast with Berlin. Berlin is sophisticated, confident, and deeply experienced. Kayla approaches problems differently. Their interactions help reveal Berlin's personality from another perspective. He may be the leader, but leadership does not mean knowing everything. Sometimes the person with the technical knowledge has the advantage. Damien, the intellectual connection. Damien, played by Tristan Ulloa, is another important member of the team. His relationship with Berlin adds a different dimension to the story. While Berlin often approaches life through instinct, confidence, and performance, Damien provides another kind of intelligence. The partnership demonstrates that Berlin does not simply recruit people who are physically powerful. He needs people capable of thinking. The heist is too sophisticated to succeed through brute force. Everyone has to understand the larger strategy. And Damien becomes an important part of that intellectual foundation. Cameron, the unpredictable element. Cameron brings energy and unpredictability to the group. That unpredictability can be valuable in a heist. Sometimes a plan becomes successful precisely because someone can respond to unexpected circumstances. But unpredictability is also dangerous. Berlin prefers control. He wants every piece of the operation to fit into his larger design. When someone behaves unpredictably, that control becomes weaker. Cameron's presence therefore creates an interesting contrast. The crew needs her. But she can also make the operation more complicated. Bruce, strength and practical skills. Bruce contributes another important set of abilities. His role demonstrates how a successful heist requires people who can execute difficult tasks under pressure. Berlin may create the strategy, but strategy is meaningless without execution. The team needs people capable of turning ideas into reality. Bruce becomes part of that practical foundation. His presence also helps balance the more intellectual and emotional personalities within the group. ROI, youth and ambition. ROI represents another side of Berlin's crew. He is younger and ambitious. Joining Berlin's operation gives him the opportunity to participate in something extraordinary. But being part of a sophisticated criminal team also carries enormous pressure. Berlin's standards are extremely high. He expects competence. He expects loyalty. And he expects people to follow the larger vision. ROI therefore has to prove that he belongs. His development helps show how Berlin influences the people around him. Berlin's leadership style. Berlin is not a conventional leader. He does not lead through kindness. He leads through confidence. He expects people to believe in him. Sometimes that confidence becomes arrogance. But there is a reason people follow him. He has vision. He makes complicated ideas appear possible. He can walk into an impossible situation and behave as though everything is already under control. That confidence is contagious. But it can also become dangerous. Berlin's biggest weakness may be the same thing that makes him powerful. His belief in himself. He sometimes assumes that he can control people and circumstances simply because he understands them. But human beings are not machines. They do not always behave according to logic. And romance becomes one of the biggest challenges to Berlin's control. Love versus the perfect crime. One of the central themes of Berlin is the conflict between criminal strategy and romantic emotion. Berlin is a sophisticated thief. He understands planning. He understands deception. He understands timing. But he is also fascinated by love. And love is something he cannot control as easily as a security system. This creates an interesting contradiction. Berlin wants to design the perfect robbery. But his emotions repeatedly threaten to complicate the plan. This makes the character more human. He is not simply a cold mastermind. He is someone who wants excitement, beauty, romance, and connection. His relationships therefore become just as important to the story as the robbery itself. Berlin as an anti-hero. Berlin is not presented as a traditional hero. He is a criminal. His actions have real consequences. The series does not need to pretend otherwise. But the character is fascinating because he possesses qualities normally associated with heroic protagonists. He is charismatic. He is intelligent. He is courageous. He is loyal to people he considers important. He is willing to take enormous risks. At the same time, he can be selfish, manipulative, arrogant, and morally questionable. This contradiction makes him an anti-hero. Audiences may become fascinated by him without necessarily agreeing with his decisions. That distinction is important when discussing the series. The entertainment comes from the fictional character and his extraordinary circumstances, not from presenting real-world criminal behavior as something to imitate. The heist as a performance. Perhaps the most distinctive idea in Berlin is the concept of the robbery as an illusion. Berlin does not want the operation to look ordinary. He wants it to feel impossible. The jewel theft becomes a performance involving deception, timing, psychology, and misdirection. This idea fits Berlin perfectly. He enjoys theatricality. He enjoys elegant appearances. He likes to make people believe one thing while secretly doing another. The audience is therefore watching two performances simultaneously. The first is Berlin's performance for the people inside the story. The second is the performance created for the viewers. The series constantly encourages us to ask, what are we seeing? What are we missing? What is Berlin hiding? Why the heist is difficult? Stealing something worth 44 million euros is obviously an enormous challenge. But the value of the target is not the only problem. The crew has to deal with security. They must coordinate their actions. Why a Berlin spin-off makes sense. Berlin was one of the most distinctive characters in the original series. He had an unusual combination of elegance, intelligence, cruelty, confidence, and vulnerability. Even when audiences disagreed with his actions, he was difficult to ignore. That makes him a natural choice for a spin-off. Instead of trying to recreate the entire original formula, the new series can focus on one character. That allows the story to slow down and explore personality. The heist remains important. But Berlin himself becomes the main attraction. The visual identity of Berlin. The series also continues the stylish visual language associated with the franchise. Luxury locations. Elegant clothing. Sophisticated environments. High-stakes robberies. International settings. And Berlin himself often looks less like a traditional criminal and more like someone attending an expensive event. That contrast is intentional. His appearance becomes part of his weapon. He does not want to look like a desperate thief. He wants to appear confident and sophisticated. That allows him to blend into environments where people might never expect a criminal to appear. The importance of humor. Despite the tension, Berlin also benefits from moments of humor. The characters have different personalities, and their interactions can create lighter moments. This prevents the story from becoming relentlessly dark. Berlin's arrogance itself can sometimes become amusing. He may take himself extremely seriously, while the people around him see the absurdity of the situation. That balance between suspense and humor helps make the characters more accessible. A different kind of money heist story. The original Money Heist focuses heavily on survival. The professor's team enters an institution and becomes trapped in a dangerous confrontation with the authorities. Berlin has a somewhat different flavor. It is more interested in elegance, romance, adventure, and the personality of its central character. The heist remains dangerous. But Berlin's attitude creates a different atmosphere. He enjoys the game. He appreciates the challenge. He treats the operation almost like a piece of art. That makes the spin-off feel distinct while remaining connected to the larger franchise. The human side of a mastermind. Perhaps the most valuable contribution of Berlin is that it reminds viewers that masterminds are still human. Berlin can plan. He can manipulate. He can predict. But he can also fall in love. He can become jealous. He can make emotional decisions. He can trust the wrong person. He can underestimate others. Those imperfections make him believable. A completely perfect criminal mastermind would eventually become boring. Berlin is interesting precisely because he is not perfect. His intelligence gets him into extraordinary situations. His emotions sometimes threaten to destroy the very plans his intelligence created. The meaning behind the 44 million euros. The 44 million euro worth of jewels represents more than financial wealth. It represents temptation. For Berlin, the prize is also proof of mastery. Successfully stealing such a valuable collection would demonstrate his ability to accomplish something that seems impossible. This is part of his ego. He does not simply want to succeed. He wants to succeed beautifully. That distinction defines his character. Berlin's philosophy of crime. Berlin sees crime differently from many ordinary criminals. For him, it is almost an intellectual discipline. There is preparation. There is timing. There is style. There is psychology. There is performance. This philosophy explains why he can appear strangely calm during situations that would terrify most people. He enjoys the challenge. The more complicated the situation becomes, the more fascinating it becomes for him. But that confidence can also become arrogance. And arrogance is dangerous. The cost of overconfidence. Berlin's greatest strength can also become his greatest weakness. He believes strongly in his ability to understand people. But nobody can predict every human reaction. A crew member may make an unexpected decision. A romantic relationship may become complicated. A plan may encounter a problem that was never anticipated. And when that happens, Berlin has to improvise. This is where the series becomes especially interesting. The audience sees a man who wants complete control slowly discovering that control has limits. The larger theme of identity. Identity is another important theme. The criminals use aliases. They hide their real names. They adopt new personalities. But the longer they work together, the more their true identities begin to emerge. Their pasts influence their decisions. Their relationships reveal their vulnerabilities. Their fears become visible. The city names may hide their identities from the outside world, but they cannot hide themselves from one another forever. What makes Berlin engaging? The series works because it combines several different genres. It is a crime thriller. It is a heist story. It contains romance. It includes comedy. It explores friendship and loyalty. It also features suspense and mystery. The result is a story that can move between emotional conversations and high-stakes criminal planning. That variety keeps the narrative from feeling repetitive. Final analysis: Berlin's legacy. Berlin gives viewers a new perspective on one of the most recognizable characters from Money Heist. Set before the original series, it follows Berlin during a period when he is still building his reputation as an extraordinary thief. His target is spectacular, 44 million euros in jewels. But the real attraction is the way he plans to steal them. He wants the robbery to resemble an illusionist's act. That concept perfectly captures his personality. Berlin wants to control what people see. He wants to manipulate expectations. He wants to turn a crime into a performance. To accomplish this, he assembles a specialized crew consisting of Kayla, Damien, Cameron, Bruce, and ROI. Each member brings something different. Their abilities make the operation possible. But their personalities also create complications. Because the greatest challenge in any team is not necessarily the task. It is the people. And Berlin discovers that lesson repeatedly. His intelligence can help him understand security. His experience can help him anticipate danger. His confidence can inspire his crew. Money Heist, The Phenomenon, 2020, How a Spanish Crime Series Conquered the World. Introduction, the story behind the phenomenon. What happens when a television series that was never expected to become a worldwide sensation suddenly crosses borders, languages, cultures, and expectations? That is the fascinating story explored in Money Heist, The Phenomenon, the 2020 documentary about the extraordinary international success of Money Heist, originally known as La Casa de Papel. Released on Netflix on April 3, 2020, the documentary takes viewers behind the scenes of the series and examines a question that seems almost unbelievable in retrospect. How did a Spanish crime drama become a global cultural phenomenon? The answer is not simply The Professor. It is not simply Tokyo. It is not simply Berlin, Nairobi, Denver, Rio, or the iconic red jumpsuits. It is not even just the story of a seemingly impossible robbery. The phenomenon happened because several different elements came together at exactly the right moment. There was an ambitious concept. There were memorable characters. There was a distinctive visual identity. There was an unusual storytelling structure. There were emotional relationships that audiences could connect with. And then there was Netflix, which transformed the series from a successful Spanish production into an international sensation. Money Heist, The Phenomenon explores this journey through interviews with the creators, cast, and production team. Rather than simply repeating the story of the fictional heists, the documentary focuses on the real-world journey behind them. It examines how the series was created, how it initially performed in Spain, how Netflix discovered its potential, and how audiences around the world eventually embraced its characters and symbols. From Spanish television to global sensation. One of the most interesting aspects of the Money Heist story is that its worldwide success was not guaranteed. The original series premiered in Spain in 2017. It was designed as a limited television series. The creators had a clear beginning, middle, and ending in mind. The story was ambitious, but its initial television journey was not the international explosion that audiences might imagine today. The series attracted attention and positive reactions, but its traditional television ratings declined during its original Spanish run. That could easily have been the end of the story. A series could premiere strongly, lose viewers, finish its planned run, and eventually become a footnote in television history. But something unexpected happened. Netflix entered the picture. And everything changed. The Netflix effect. The acquisition of Money Heist by Netflix became the turning point. This is one of the central subjects of the phenomenon. Netflix introduced the series to audiences far beyond Spain. The platform made the show accessible to viewers who might never have encountered a Spanish television drama through traditional broadcasting. Suddenly, the Professor's plan was no longer limited to Spanish television audiences. Viewers from different countries could discover the series. And they did. The show began spreading internationally through word of mouth. People recommended it to friends. Fans discussed the characters. Social media amplified the excitement. Viewers started connecting with the red jumpsuits and masks. The series became something much bigger than its original creators had anticipated. The Unexpected Rise. The documentary's title is important. It calls the story a phenomenon because the growth of the series was extraordinary. There was no simple formula that guaranteed success. The show had already existed before Netflix. Its creators had already worked on it. Its actors had already performed the characters. Its first audience had already seen it. But the international environment created by streaming changed how people could discover and consume the story. Instead of waiting for a scheduled television broadcast, viewers could watch episodes on demand. They could watch one episode, then another, then another. The cliffhanger became even more powerful because audiences could continue immediately. This encouraged binge-watching. And binge-watching helped transform Money Heist into a shared global experience. Why the characters became so important? One of the major reasons Money Heist connected with viewers was its characters. The documentary explores the people behind those characters and the creative process involved in bringing them to life. The series did not depend entirely on its robbery plot. It created characters with different personalities, histories, weaknesses, ambitions, and emotional problems. The professor was the strategist. Tokyo was impulsive and passionate. Berlin was sophisticated and unpredictable. Nairobi was confident and emotionally powerful. Denver was energetic and emotional. Rio represented youth and vulnerability. Moscow brought experience and family concerns. Helsinki and Oslo represented loyalty and physical strength. Each character brought a different energy. This made the group feel like a collection of individuals rather than a single anonymous criminal organization. The actors behind the masks. The documentary gives attention to the actors who transformed these fictional characters into cultural icons. That is particularly important because the famous masks and costumes can sometimes make viewers forget that the characters are performances. Behind Tokyo is Úrsula Corberó. Behind the professor is Álvaro Morte. Behind Berlin is Pedro Alonso. Behind Nairobi is Alba Flores. Behind Denver is Jamie Lorente. Behind Rio is Miguel Herron. Behind Moscow is Paco Chus. And many other performers contributed to the identity of the series. Their performances gave emotional depth to a story that could otherwise have become simply another crime thriller. The documentary allows audiences to see the creative process from the perspective of the people who experienced it. The professor, an unusual television character. The professor became one of the defining figures of the series. He is not a traditional action hero. He does not dominate opponents through physical strength. His power comes from preparation, intelligence, psychology, and patience. This made him unusual. The series turned planning into entertainment. Instead of asking whether a character could win a fight, audiences were encouraged to wonder whether the professor could stay several steps ahead of the authorities. Will a relationship destroy the plan? Will the criminal survive? These questions are built into the structure of the story. The documentary explores how the creators developed a series capable of maintaining this level of tension. The suspense was not accidental. It came from writing, directing, editing, performances, and pacing working together. The role of cliffhanger. Cliffhanger became one of the series' strongest storytelling tools. An episode might end at precisely the moment when a major problem appears. The audience is left with a question. Then streaming makes it easy to continue. This creates a powerful cycle. The viewer wants to know what happens next. One episode becomes two become several. And suddenly the viewer has spent hours inside the world of the series. The documentary's examination of the show's success helps explain why its storytelling structure worked so effectively in the streaming environment. When reality meets fiction. There is another fascinating aspect of the phenomenon. The documentary shows that the real people behind the series were experiencing their own unexpected story. The fictional professor planned an impossible robbery. Meanwhile, the real creators were producing a Spanish television series that unexpectedly became a worldwide success. In a strange way, both stories involve unexpected victories. The fictional gang attempts to defeat powerful institutions. The real production team attempts to make a television series that reaches audiences. Neither situation can be understood simply through the original plan. Unexpected circumstances change everything. Netflix changes the future. The international success of the first parts changed the future of the franchise. Netflix's decision to acquire the series and invest in additional episodes transformed Money Heist from a limited Spanish television project into a much larger international franchise. The success led to additional parts. The story expanded. The audience expanded. The budget and production scale increased. And the characters became global celebrities. This transformation is one of the documentary's most important subjects. The series that began as a Spanish production became a worldwide brand. From limited series to franchise. The original concept had been designed as a limited story. But the unexpected international response changed that. The demand for more episodes became enormous. The story continued. New characters were introduced. The scale became larger. The production became more ambitious. The franchise eventually extended beyond the original series through additional productions, documentaries, and adaptations. The phenomenon therefore did not simply make the original show successful. It changed its future. The cultural impact. The cultural impact of Money Heist can be seen in its symbols. The masks. The red jumpsuits. The city names. Bella Ciao. The professor's image. These became recognizable beyond the original television audience. Fans around the world began using these symbols in different ways. The show entered popular culture. That is the true meaning of becoming a phenomenon. A television series becomes part of conversations that exist outside the television screen. Why audiences connected with the criminals? Perhaps the most complicated aspect of the series' cultural impact is the audience's emotional connection to criminals. The characters commit serious fictional crimes. Yet viewers become emotionally invested in them. Why? Because the writing gives them personal stories. We understand their fears. We see their relationships. We learn about their pasts. We watch them experience consequences. The series does not simply say, "These are criminals." It asks us to understand them as people. That does not mean their actions are automatically justified. Instead, it creates moral complexity. And moral complexity creates discussion. The difference between understanding and approval. For responsible analysis, this distinction is important. A viewer can understand why a fictional character behaves a certain way without approving of that behavior. Money Heist uses crime as a dramatic framework to explore themes of inequality, rebellion, loyalty, and identity. The documentary focuses on the phenomenon surrounding the series rather than encouraging real-world criminal activity. This makes it possible to discuss the show's appeal while maintaining an appropriate distinction between fictional entertainment and real-life behavior. From Spain to the world. The international journey of Money Heist is ultimately a story about globalization. A Spanish-language production reached viewers across continents. Its characters became recognizable internationally. Its music reached new audiences. Its visual symbols became globally familiar. And its success demonstrated that powerful storytelling does not have to originate from Hollywood or be produced in English to achieve worldwide popularity. That is one of the most significant legacies of the franchise. Money Heist, From Tokyo to Berlin. The success of the franchise eventually led to another behind-the-scenes documentary project. Money Heist, From Tokyo to Berlin was released in 2 parts in 2021, alongside the final season of Money Heist. This documentary expanded the behind-the-scenes perspective. Where the phenomenon focuses heavily on how the series became an unexpected global success, From Tokyo to Berlin explores the production of the additional episodes and the creation of the franchise on a larger scale. It provides viewers with another opportunity to see the people behind the cameras. The final production journey. By the time the later episodes were being produced, Money Heist was no longer a small Spanish television experiment. It had become an international production with enormous expectations. The cast and crew knew that millions of viewers were waiting. That created a completely different level of pressure. The series had to maintain its identity while continuing to grow. The story had to become bigger without losing the emotional qualities that had made audiences care about the characters. Creating suspense. One of the show's biggest achievements is its ability to maintain suspense. The audience constantly asks questions. Will the professor be discovered? Will the police enter? Will the hostages escape? Will someone betray the group? Will a relationship destroy the plan? Will the criminals survive? These questions are built into the structure of the story. The documentary explores how the creators developed a series capable of maintaining this level of tension. The suspense was not accidental. It came from writing, directing, editing, performances, and pacing working together. The role of cliffhanger. Cliffhanger became one of the series' strongest storytelling tools. An episode might end at precisely the moment when a major problem appears. The audience is left with a question. Then streaming makes it easy to continue. This creates a powerful cycle. The viewer wants to know what happens next. One episode becomes 2. 2 becomes several. And suddenly the viewer has spent hours inside the world of the series. The documentary's examination of the show's success helps explain why its storytelling structure worked so effectively in the streaming environment. When reality meets fiction. There is another fascinating aspect of the phenomenon. The documentary shows that the real people behind the series were experiencing their own unexpected story. The fictional professor planned an impossible robbery. Meanwhile, the real creators were producing a Spanish television series that unexpectedly became a worldwide success. In a strange way, both stories involve unexpected victories. The fictional gang attempts to defeat powerful institutions. The real production team attempts to make a television series that reaches audiences. Neither situation can be understood simply through the original plan. Unexpected circumstances change everything. Netflix changes the future. The international success of the first parts changed the future of the franchise. Netflix's decision to acquire the series and invest in additional episodes transformed Money Heist from a limited Spanish television project into a much larger international franchise. The success led to additional parts. The story expanded. The audience expanded. The budget and production scale increased. And the characters became global celebrities. This transformation is one of the documentary's most important subjects. The series that began as a Spanish production became a worldwide brand. From limited series to franchise. The original concept had been designed as a limited story. But the unexpected international response changed that. The demand for more episodes became enormous. The story continued. New characters were introduced. The scale became larger. The production became more ambitious. The franchise eventually extended beyond the original series through additional productions, documentaries, and adaptations. The phenomenon therefore did not simply make the original show successful. It changed its future. The cultural impact. The cultural impact of Money Heist can be seen in its symbols. The masks. The red jumpsuits. The city names. Bella Ciao. The professor's image. These became recognizable beyond the original television audience. Fans around the world began using these symbols in different ways. The show entered popular culture. That is the true meaning of becoming a phenomenon. A television series becomes part of conversations that exist outside the television screen. Why audiences connected with the criminals? Perhaps the most complicated aspect of the series' cultural impact is the audience's emotional connection to criminals. The characters commit serious fictional crimes. Yet viewers become emotionally invested in them. Why? Because the writing gives them personal stories. We understand their fears. We see their relationships. We learn about their pasts. We watch them experience consequences. The series does not simply say, these are criminals. It asks us to understand them as people. That does not mean their actions are automatically justified. Instead, it creates moral complexity. And moral complexity creates discussion. The difference between understanding and approval. For responsible analysis, this distinction is important. A viewer can understand why a fictional character behaves a certain way without approving of that behavior. Money Heist uses crime as a dramatic framework to explore themes of inequality, rebellion, loyalty, and identity. The documentary focuses on the phenomenon surrounding the series rather than encouraging real-world criminal activity. This makes it possible to discuss the show's appeal while maintaining an appropriate distinction between fictional entertainment and real-life behavior. From Spain to the world. The international journey of Money Heist is ultimately a story about globalization. A Spanish-language production reached viewers across continents. Its characters became recognizable internationally. Its music reached new audiences. Its visual symbols became globally familiar. And its success demonstrated that powerful storytelling does not have to originate from Hollywood or be produced in English to achieve worldwide popularity. That is one of the most significant legacies of the franchise. Money Heist, from Tokyo to Berlin. The success of the franchise eventually led to another behind-the-scenes documentary project. Money Heist, from Tokyo to Berlin was released in 2 parts in 2021, alongside the final season of Money Heist. This documentary expanded the behind-the-scenes perspective, where the phenomenon focuses heavily on how the series became an unexpected global success. From Tokyo to Berlin explores the production of the additional episodes and the creation of the franchise on a larger scale. It provides viewers with another opportunity to see the people behind the cameras. The final production journey. By the time the later episodes were being produced, Money Heist was no longer a small Spanish television experiment. It had become an international production with enormous expectations. The cast and crew knew that millions of viewers were waiting. That created a completely different level of pressure. The series had to maintain its identity while continuing to grow. The story had to become bigger without losing the emotional qualities that had made audiences care about the characters.